Good day everyone, I am Mark Del P. Inoho and welcome to this pre-recorded video presentation on curriculum development. In this video, we will explore key concepts, theories, principles, strategies, and innovations that shape how curriculum is designed, implemented, and evaluated in educational settings, whether you are a teacher, an aspiring educator, or someone who is interested on how education works. This video will give you a solid foundation in curriculum development. Let's begin by defining curriculum development. Curriculum development is the systematic planning of educational experiences to help students meet learning objectives. It involves key components such as curriculum models, theories, instructional strategies, assessment, and evaluation. A well-developed curriculum ensures that students receive a structured, comprehensive, and meaningful education tailored to their needs and interests as well as society's expectations. Throughout this discussion, we will not only define important curriculum concepts but also provide real-world examples of how they apply in classroom settings. So, let's get started. First, let's talk about the explicit curriculum. The explicit curriculum refers to the officially planned and structured content that is intentionally taught in schools. It includes formal lesson plans, subject materials, textbooks, and learning objectives set by education authorities. Key characteristics of explicit curriculum includes standardization because it follows national or local educational standards and guidelines. Next, it is accessible outcomes. Learning objectives are clearly defined, measurable. Next, it is planned instruction because teachers follow structured lesson plans. Next, it has core subjects which includes math, science, language, and social studies that are commonly part of this curriculum. Lastly, grade level expectation because topics are arranged according to the age-appropriate levels so that students can really understand and relate each subject taught in the curriculum. For example, a school's mathematics curriculum includes a structured syllabus outlining what students should learn at each grade level. In grade 5, students are expected to master fractions and decimals, while in grade 7, they progress to algebra. These topics are explicitly listed in the curriculum documents and followed by teachers. With that, explicit curriculum ensures that all students receive the same foundational knowledge, providing a consistent learning experience across different schools and regions in the Philippines. Next, let's explore the hidden curriculum. This refers to the unwritten, unofficial lessons that students learn through interactions, school culture, and classroom environments. It includes values, beliefs, and social expectations that are not part of formal lesson plans but significantly impact student behavior and development. These are the key aspects of hidden curriculum, which includes, first is social norms. Students learn behavioral expectations such as respecting authority and following rules inside the classroom. Next, cultural values. Schools shape attitudes about diversity, cooperation, and ethics. Next, teacher expectations. Subtle messages from educators influence students' self-esteem and motivation to learn. Next is peer interactions. Learning teamwork, competition, and social responsibilities through daily school experiences. And the last one is classroom routines. Simple practices like raising hands to speak or standing in line teach order and discipline among students. Just like, for example, a teacher who always encourages class participation and intentionally teaches students the importance of confidence and expressing their opinions. Similarly, if teachers always call on certain students while ignoring others, they may send an unintended message about favoritism or inequality. Therefore, hidden curriculum is essential in shaping students' social and emotional development, and educators should be mindful of the implicit lessons they communicate. At this point of time, let us discuss the null curriculum. What is null curriculum? Null curriculum refers to the topics that are unintentionally left out of the explicit curriculum. What is not taught is just as important as what is included because it reflects what a society values or neglects in education. These are the key characteristics of the null curriculum, which includes omission of certain topics because some subjects are not included in formal lessons. Next, lack of diverse perspectives. Important cultural or historical viewpoints may be excluded. Next, educational prioritization. Some skills or knowledge areas receive more focus than others. And the impact of knowledge gaps because some students may graduate without exposure to critical global issues. And the last one is political and cultural influence. Decisions about what is omitted often reflect societal norms and power structures. For example, many traditional history textbooks focus on national achievements while omitting certain controversial topics such as struggles of indigenous communities or colonial histories. This omission shapes students' understanding of historical events and social justice issues. Therefore, being aware of the NAL curriculum allows educators to advocate for a more inclusive and comprehensive education. This time, let us proceed with the core curriculum. What is core curriculum? Core curriculum refers to the essential subjects that all students are required to study, meaning, regardless of their academic or career interests, it provides a broad foundation of knowledge necessary for higher education and professional success. These are the key characteristics of core curriculum, which includes fundamental subjects such as mathematics, science, language arts, and social studies that are prioritized. Next, uniform learning standards. All students must meet the same educational benchmarks and also essential life skill because It focuses on problem solving, literacy, and critical thinking. Next is college and career preparation. Why? Because it provides adaptability across contexts while core subjects remain the same. Teaching methods may vary. For example, regardless of students' career aspirations, they must take English and math classes in high school, meaning even an aspiring artist or musician still needs to complete these core subjects in order to graduate. Therefore, core curriculum ensures that all students acquire foundational skills necessary for lifelong learning and active citizenship. Lastly, let's examine the spiral curriculum. This approach revisits key concepts multiple times throughout a student's education, with each encounter increasing in depth and complexity, meaning this model reinforces learning and enhances long-term retention. Key features of the spiral curriculum includes repetition of concepts because topics are reintroduced periodically at more advanced levels. Next, building on prior knowledge. New learning connects with previously acquired skills. Next, progressive complexity. Students acquire concepts that become more detailed over time. Next, students are encouraged mastery because it allows for gradual improvement and deeper understanding among different subjects. And lastly, applied in multiple disciplines. Spiral curriculum is applied or it is used in subjects like mathematics, science, and language learning. For example, in early elementary school, students learn basic sentence structures. As they progress to middle school, they study complex grammar rules and essay writing. By high school, they analyze literature and write research paper. Therefore, the spiral curriculum measures that students continuously build upon their knowledge, reinforcing learning through repetition and complexity over time. In the second part of our discussion, let's explore the theories in curriculum development. As we all know, John Dewey was a strong advocate of experiential learning. His progressive education theory emphasizes that students best learn when they actively engage in experiences that connect to real-life situations. Instead of passively absorbing information, learners should interact with their environment, explore concepts, and reflect on their experiences. This theory supports student-centered instruction, meaning learners play an active role in shaping their own educational journey. Teachers act as a facilitators, guiding students through inquiry-based learning. Dewey's approach values more on critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, decision-making, and the 21st century skills that students need to acquire in this ever-changing world over rote memorization. For example, in a science class, instead of simply memorizing definitions, students conduct experiments, observe chemical reactions, and record their findings. With this, Dewey's theory is evident in project-based learning and inquiry-based learning, which encourage students to explore and solve real-world problems. Next, Ralph Tyler introduced a structured and systematic approach to curriculum development known as Tyler's rationale. This model follows four essential principles. First, defining learning objectives. Establishing clear and measurable goals for student achievement. Next, selecting appropriate learning experiences where choosing activities that help students meet those objectives. Third, organizing content logically, ensuring that information builds upon prior knowledge. And the last one is evaluating student progress. This means that assessing whether students have achieved the intended learning outcomes. For example, in curriculum development. In mathematics curriculum, objectives are set first. For example, mastering algebraic equations, followed by structured lessons, exercises, and assessments. With this, Tyler's model remains widely used in designing curricula that align with competency-based education and standardized assessments. Next, let's explore Hilda Taba's approach. Hilda Taba believed that teachers should be directly involved in curriculum development. Her grassroots model follows an inductive approach, meaning the curriculum starts with specific classroom experiences before expanding into broader educational programs. Steps in Taba's model. These are the following steps in Taba's model. First is diagnosis of learner needs, identifying students' challenges and strengths. Next is formulating specific objectives, because objectives are important in the teaching and learning process. Therefore, setting clear learning goals based on student needs enhances the teaching and learning process. Next, selecting learning content. As we all know, selecting learning content is very crucial because in choosing really relevant topics and resources, it is very effective to choose localized topic and resources in order to minimize students' learning gaps. Next is organizing content into sequence and evaluating the effectiveness of the curriculum, which said that continuously improving based on student performance. For example, a teacher notices that students struggle with fractions, so they modify lesson plans to include hands-on activities using pizza slices or measuring cups. Taba's model is often seen in differentiated instruction and teacher-led curriculum planning. Next, let's explore about Franklin Babbitt's theory. Franklin Babbitt viewed curriculum development as a scientific process, meaning education should be efficient and practical, which prepares students for specific societal roles. His model follows an industrial approach, meaning education should train students for real-world tasks and job readiness. For example, a technical vocational curriculum that equips students with skills for employment in industries such as engineering, agriculture, or healthcare. Franklin Babbitt's theory remains influential in career and technical education programs. ensuring that all students gain marketable skills. Next is Jerome Bruner's constructivist theory. Jerome Bruner's constructivist theory emphasizes or highlights that discovery-based learning, where students build their own understanding of concepts through exploration and active engagement. Jerome Bruner introduced the spiral curriculum, where students revisit topics at increasing levels of complexity over time, as what I have discussed a while ago. Example, in science curriculum, students first learn about simple organisms in elementary school. Later, in high school or in college, advancing to cellular biology in high school. Jerome Bruner's theory encourages hands-on learning, meaning students should manipulate different objects or real-world examples and applications of what they have learned inside the classroom, as well as scaffolding and cognitive engagement. Benjamin Bloom created a framework to classify learning objectives into 3 domains. These are cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Cognitive, or the knowledge, it includes understanding and applying information. For affective, this emphasizes or highlights our attitudes that we need to acquire in studying different lessons. Therefore, it develops values, emotions, and social skills. Next is psychomotor. Psychomotor, or our motor skills, this includes physical and technical skills development. For example, in a history course, students remember key dates. That is an example of cognitive. Debate historical decisions. That is an example of affective domain. And present historical reenactments. This is an example of psychomotor domain. Therefore, Bloom's taxonomy helps educators create structured, progressive learning objectives that will help students succeed or improve their learning journey in school. On the third part of our discussion in this pre-recorded video presentation, let's explore more about the principles of curriculum design. First is what we call the continuity. Continuity in curriculum design ensures that students build on previously learned knowledge and skills as they advance through different grade levels. It promotes a structured and logical progression of learning, preventing knowledge gaps and reinforcing concepts over time. Why is continuity important in the educational system in the Philippines? Because first, it allows students to develop a solid foundation before progressing to more complex topics. Next is, it ensures coherence in learning by connecting previous lessons with new content. For example of continuity in curriculum design. In mathematics, students start by learning basic addition and subtraction in early grades. In later grades, in high school, when they progress, they learn how to multiply, or the multiplication process, division, algebra, and calculus. Therefore, ensuring continuity requires curriculum planners to carefully align learning objectives across different grade levels to support student progression. The second principle of curriculum design is the scope. Scope refers to the depth and breadth of content covered in the curriculum, while sequence refers to the order in which topics are being taught. Together, they determine what students learn and when they learn it. Why is scope and sequence important in curriculum design? Because it provides a clear roadmap for teachers and students. Also, it ensures that learning progresses from simple to complex topics. Next, it prevents redundancy and helps maintain logical flow. For example of scope and sequence in curriculum design. In science curriculum, students first learn about basic life processes in elementary school, then progress to cell biology in middle school, and eventually study genetics and biotechnology in high school. With that being said, a well-structured scope and sequence ensure that students receive a well-rounded education with a logical progression of learning and experiences. The third principle of curriculum design is integration. What is integration in curriculum design? Integration in curriculum design means linking different subjects and concepts to create a more meaningful and connected learning experiences. It helps students see relationships between different fields of knowledge and apply learning to real-world contexts. Now, why is integration important in curriculum design? First, it enhances critical thinking by showing how concepts are interconnected. Next, it makes learning more engaging, especially when teachers relate the topic to the experiences of the students to make it more relevant to real-life application. And lastly, it promotes deeper understanding and problem-solving skills. Example of integration in curriculum design is in a project-based learning approach, students may study environmental pollution by integrating science, the causes of pollution, for example, geography affected areas, mathematics, data analysis, and social studies, for example, policies and solutions. With that being said, integration helps students make meaningful connections between subjects, which improves their ability to apply knowledge across different areas of study. The fourth principle is what we call balance. Balance in curriculum design ensures that no subject is given excessive emphasis at the expense of others. This promotes a well-rounded education that fosters academic, social, and personal development. Why is balance really important in designing a curriculum? First, it ensures that students develop competencies in all essential areas. Second, it prevents neglecting important subjects like arts, physical education, and social sciences. Next is it supports students' diverse interests and career aspirations. Examples of balance in curriculum design is that when a well-balanced curriculum includes STEM subjects, humanities, arts, physical education, and social emotional learning. Therefore, achieving balance in curriculum design ensures that students receive a comprehensive education, preparing them for a varied career paths and life experiences. The second to the last principle of curriculum design is what we call the relevance. Relevance in curriculum design ensures that what students learn is meaningful, applicable, and beneficial in their daily lives and future careers. It connects classroom learning to real-world issues and societal needs. Now, why is relevance really important, or is it crucial in designing a curriculum? Because first, it increases student motivation and engagement. Second, it prepares students for real-life challenges and workforce demands. Last, it ensures that education remains current with social, technological, and economic changes. Example of relevance in curriculum design is that including financial literacy in math courses to help students manage personal finances. With that, a relevant curriculum keeps education meaningful and prepares all students regardless of their socio-economic background to contribute effectively to our society. The last principle of curriculum design is what we call flexibility. Flexibility in curriculum design allows for adaptation based on students' needs, cultural context, and evolving educational needs. It enables educators to make modifications while maintaining learning objectives. Why is flexibility really important, or why is it crucial in designing a curriculum? First, it accommodates diverse student learning needs and backgrounds. Second, it allows teachers to adjust instruction based on real-time feedback. And last, it enables schools to incorporate emerging trends and technologies in the teaching and learning process. Example of flexibility in curriculum design is a school that modifies the curriculum to include local environmental issues in science class. In conclusion, flexibility ensures that curriculum remains dynamic, meaning it is ever-changing, inclusive, meaning it is for all, there is an equality, and also responsive to educational challenges, because as we all know, every challenges in the school should be responded by the teacher or the student. The fourth part of our discussion is what we call the curriculum development models. So, the first model we will discuss is the Tyler model, also known as the rational model. It is developed by Ralph Tyler in the 1940s. This model follows a systematic approach that emphasizes clear objectives, organized learning experiences, and structured evaluation. Tyler believed that education should be goal-oriented, meaning that every learning experience should contribute to specific learning outcomes. These are the key features of the Tyler model. First, defining objectives, which means setting clear and measurable learning goals. Next is that what we call the selecting learning experiences, choosing activities that help students achieve these objectives. Third, organizing learning experiences. structuring content to enhance understanding and retention. And the last one is evaluating outcomes. It means that measuring whether students have achieved the intended objectives. For example, imagine a high school science teacher designing a biology curriculum. Using the Tyler model, they would first define learning objectives such as, for example, students will be able to explain the process of photosynthesis. Then they would select learning experiences like laboratory experiments and interactive videos. The teacher would organize lessons from basic concepts to complex processes, ensuring logical progression. Finally, student understanding would be evaluated through quizzes and practical demonstrations. The strength of the Tyler model is that it provides a clear, structured framework that ensures alignment between objectives and assessment. However, it has limitations. It may be too rigid and does not always account for student diversity or changing learning needs. The next model we will explore is the TABA model. It is developed by Hilda Taba. Unlike Tyler's top-down approach, Taba advocated for a grassroots method where teachers play a central role in curriculum development. She believed that educators, being the closest to students, should create, test, and refine curricula based on classroom observations. These are the key features of the TABA model. First is the diagnosis of student needs, meaning understanding learners' needs before designing the curriculum. Next, formulating objectives, developing goals based on identified needs among the students. Next is selecting content, choosing relevant topics and materials aligned or appropriate for all the learners. Next, organizing content and learning experiences, structuring lessons for better comprehension. And the last one is evaluation and revision. This means that as a teacher, you have to test the curriculum and refine it as it needed. For example, a primary school teacher notices that students struggle with fractions. Instead of following a fixed curriculum, they develop hands-on activities such as cutting paper pizzas into equal parts. After testing this approach, they refine the lesson plan based on student feedback and performance. These are the strengths of the TABA model. The TABA model is flexible and responsive to students' needs. However, it has limitations where it requires continuous teacher involvement, which can be time-consuming. The next one is the Wheeler model. It was introduced by D.K. Wheeler, which means that it takes a more dynamic and cyclical approach to curriculum development. Unlike Tyler's linear approach, Wheeler believed that curriculum development should be an ongoing process where continuous modifications are made. These are the key features of the Wheeler model. First, it follows a cyclical nature, as what I have said a while ago, where curriculum is revisited and refined regularly. Second, the interconnectedness of the components. Objectives, content, learning experiences, and evaluation influence one another. Next is that it is flexible because it allows adjustments based on student progress and feedback. For example, a university revises its teacher education program every 5 years based on new research in pedagogy. Instead of following a fixed curriculum, the university collects feedback from students and faculty, modifies learning materials, and updates teaching methods regularly. Its strengths includes that it ensures curriculum remains relevant and effective, but it has limitation where it requires ongoing evaluation and may lead to frequent adjustments that disrupt continuity. Now, let us discuss understanding by design or UBD. It was developed by Grant Wiggins and J. McTighe. This model starts with the desired learning outcomes and works backward to develop instructional strategies. These are the key features of the understanding by design. First is it is a background design model where it begins with end goals and plan instructions accordingly. Next, it has essential question. It focuses on big picture thinking and understanding. Next, it follows performance-based assessment because it evaluates students through real-world applications. For example, a history teacher wants students to develop critical thinking skills. Instead of starting with textbook chapters, they begin with question. For example, what causes societies to collapse? Lessons are then designed around case studies, debates, and projects, with assessments measuring students' ability to analyze historical events. Its strength includes encourages deep understanding rather than memorization. But the limitation for this model that it requires careful planning and is time intensive for educators. Finally, the last model is what we call the Staffel-Beams CIPP model, which focuses on curriculum evaluation rather than just design. It was developed by Daniel Staffel-Beam, which assesses curriculum effectiveness based on four components. First, context. Second, input. Third, process. And the last one is product. These are the key features of the CIPP model. First is context evaluation, meaning understanding the needs and objectives of the curriculum. Next is input evaluation, analyzing available resources and instructional strategies. The third one is process evaluation. This means that monitoring curriculum implementation and identifying issues. And the last one is product evaluation. This means that measuring the impact on student learning outcomes. For example, a Ministry of Education evaluates a national reading program. They analyze whether the program meets student needs, the context, assess the quality of teaching resources, the input, observe implementation in school, the process, and review student literacy levels, and that is the product, to decide on improvements. Its strengths is that it provides a comprehensive framework for evaluating curriculum effectiveness. And it has limitation because it requires extensive data collection and analysis. The fifth part of our discussion is the curriculum implementation strategies. First is differentiated instruction. So as we all know, we are all familiar with this strategy, and it is a teaching approach that adapts lessons to meet the diverse needs of all the students. It acknowledges that students have different learning styles, backgrounds, and abilities. Teachers use varied instructional methods, materials, and assessment techniques to ensure that all students succeed. For example, in a reading lesson, a teacher provides three versions of the same article: one with simplified vocabulary, one with grade level text, and one with advanced vocabulary. This activity allows students to engage with the material at their own level while discussing the same concepts. The next strategy in curriculum implementation is what we call the UDL, or the Universal Design for Learning. It is an approach that removes learning barriers and provides multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression. The goal is to create inclusive learning environments that accommodate diverse learners. For example, a history teacher presents a lesson on World War II using videos, text, and interactive maps, ensuring that visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners can access the content. The next strategy is what we call the CBL, or the competency-based learning. It is a student-centered approach where students progress based on mastery of specific skills rather than time-based grade levels. This ensures that learning is personalized and meaningful. For example, a language art teachers allow students to move to the next grammar unit only after demonstrating proficiency in sentence structure. The next strategy is what we call the inquiry-based learning. Inquiry-based learning encourages students to ask questions, investigate topics, and construct their own understanding. This approach fosters critical thinking and curiosity. For example, a science teacher starts a unit on ecosystem by asking, how do human activities affect biodiversity? Students conduct independent research and experiments to form conclusions. Next strategy is what we call the PBL, or the project-based learning. Project-based learning engages students in real-world problem solving through long-term projects, and it encourages collaboration, innovation, and deep learning. For example, a biology class designs an urban garden to study plant growth, sustainability, and environmental impact. The next one is problem-centered curriculum. Problem-centered curriculum, as we all know, focuses on social, ethical, or global challenges, making learning more meaningful and applicable. Next one is the technology integration. But before that, I will give first an example of the problem-based curriculum. A geography class investigates climate change and develops solutions to reduce carbon footprints. Now, technology integration enhances learning through AI, or artificial intelligence, virtual simulations, and digital collaboration tools. It makes education more interactive and accessible. Example, AR-powered tutoring programs adapt to students' learning speeds providing personalized feedback. Now, the last strategy is what we call the culturally responsive teaching. It ensures that instruction reflects on students' cultural backgrounds and experiences, fostering creativity. For example, a history teacher incorporates multiple cultural perspectives when discussing world events. The sixth part of our discussion is what we call the curriculum, assessment, and evaluation. Now, evaluation in education is essential in determining the effectiveness of the instruction. There are two types of evaluation: formative evaluation and summative evaluation. Formative evaluation is conducted during the learning process to provide ongoing feedback, helping students and teachers identify areas for improvement. Summative evaluation, on the other hand, takes place at the end of an instructional period to measure students' learning outcomes against set standards. Now, I will give you the key differences between formative evaluation and what we call the summative evaluation. Formative evaluation, by the way, provides continuous feedback, helps adjust teaching methods and learning activities. It encourages student participation and self-improvement. For example, classroom discussions, quizzes, exit tickets, and peer reviews. On the other hand, summative evaluation measures overall student achievement after instruction. It determines whether learning objectives have been met. It is also used for grading, certification, and program evaluation. Examples of summative evaluations are final exams, standardized tests, and final projects. For example, in real-life application of formative evaluation and summative evaluation. Imagine a science teacher conducting formative evaluation by asking students to complete a quick quiz on the parts of a plant before moving on to the next topic. The teacher notices common misconceptions and adjusts the lessons accordingly. At the end of the unit, a summative evaluation in the form of a unit test is given to assess overall mastery of the topic or the content. Unlike traditional assessments that rely more on multiple choice tests, performance-based assessments require students to demonstrate their understanding through real-world applications. These assessments evaluate a student's ability to apply knowledge, skills, and problem-solving strategies in meaningful contexts. So, I will give you the characteristics, or I will present the characteristics of performance-based assessments. First, it focuses more on student-generated responses instead of selecting answers. It also assesses higher-order thinking skills, provide opportunities for creativity and real-world application. For examples, research projects, presentations, portfolios, laboratory experiments. Example in real-life setting in a classroom. A history teacher assigns students a performance-based assessment where they must create a digital presentation on a historical event, analyzing causes and effects instead of simply memorizing dates. This approach deepens understanding and allows students to showcase their ability to research, organize, and communicate their findings effectively. Next, is the competency-based assessment. So, competency-based assessment focuses more on evaluating students' mastery of specific skills rather than their ability to memorize facts or pass a test. It ensures that learners progress based on demonstrated proficiency instead of time spent in class. Key features of competency-based assessment includes measure skill mastery, not just content knowledge. Second, it allows students to progress at their own pace. Next, it provides multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate learning. Examples, skill demonstrations, practical applications, and student portfolios. Example in a classroom setting, a nursing program implements competency-based assessments where students must demonstrate hands-on skills such as patient care techniques before moving on to advanced coursework. This ensures that students are fully prepared for real-world clinical settings rather than just passing written exam. The last one is what we call curriculum mapping. Curriculum mapping is a planning tool that helps educators align learning objectives, instructional strategies, and assessment across grade levels and subjects. It ensures coherence in the delivery of curriculum content and prevents gaps in student learning. The benefits of curriculum mapping, because as we all know, curriculum mapping is very crucial in the curriculum evaluation and assessment. So these are the following benefits of curriculum mapping. It provides a structured framework for lesson planning. Next, it ensures continuity and consistency in instruction. Next, it identifies redundancies and gaps in the curriculum, and it also promotes collaboration among teachers and the students. Next is the steps in curriculum mapping. So how do we do curriculum mapping? First, we have to identify learning objectives, define what students should know and be able to do at the end of the lesson. Align instructional methods, select appropriate teaching strategies, and next, determine assessment strategies, choose formative or summative assessments. And last is evaluate and adjust. So continuously evaluate and adjust the curriculum based on the student performance. Example, a student district do a curriculum mapping exercise and discovers that critical thinking are only being explicitly taught in higher grade levels. To address this, they revise their curriculum to introduce these skills earlier, ensuring a gradual development throughout students' academic journey. The last part of our discussion in this pre-recorded video presentation is all about innovations and future trends in curriculum development. As we all know, our world is very dynamic and ever-changing. Therefore, there are lots of innovations and current trends in curriculum development. One example of that is the presence or the emergence of artificial intelligence, or the AI. AI is revolutionizing the field of education by enabling adaptive learning, personalized instruction, and data-driven decision-making. AI-powered tools can analyze students' progress and adjust lessons based on their strengths and weaknesses, allowing for more efficient and targeted learning experiences. With that, when we integrate AI into the curriculum development, schools can provide customized learning experiences, reduce workload for teachers, and enhance student engagement. However, it is important to balance AI-driven education with human interaction to maintain a well-rounded learning environment for all. The last one is what we call the flexible learning models. As we all know, flexible learning models allow students to progress at their own pace, personalize their education, and access learning materials through various formats. This approach ensures inclusivity, making more learners included despite of their abilities or disabilities, and accommodates different learning styles. Whether they love to sing, whether they love to dance, they love to paint, they love to talk, they love to the environment, and they love more on logical or mathematical. Flexible learning models empower students by giving them control over their education. These approaches help cater to diverse learning needs and ensure that students can learn in a way that best suits them. That's all for my pre-recorded video presentation. Thank you for your time and effort to access this pre-recorded video presentation, and I hope that you have learned something new and it can add to your knowledge and widen your cognitive abilities in the topics that are covered during my discussion. Thank you for listening, and God bless us all.